We started the year with a beer from one of the most beloved and treasured series going. And today we feature yet another, as we welcome back to the channel one of London's early craft beer trendsetters, Hackney Brewery, with the latest from their Millions of collection. And brewed to celebrate their 10th birthday, we have Millions of Yuzu. And I'll tell you what, this is another I picked up for the cracking can art alone. Just take a look at this. And sadly, you probably won't pick up all the tiny details on my basic phone camera, but there's a whole lot going on here. We have a lovely cityscape, what looks like a haunted forest up top, a nice mountain range, we've got wild horses roaming the desert plains, and we've got all sorts going on in the sea. It's just an all-round beautiful piece of work, something that Hackney have been doing for as long as I can remember. And of course, having had a few of these millions of before, we sure do know what to expect, and we sure know we won't be let down. And this incarnation is a Yuzu and Seaweed Salt Sour. And I've got to admit, I've always found Yuzu a welcome addition, as it does add a little variety to the usual citrus notes. But I must admit that seaweed salt is throwing me a little. So maybe we can expect this to be a little more gozy and a little less of the traditional sour. But as they themselves have called it a sour, who am I to argue? And I did quite enjoy the mojito version we reviewed a couple of months back. So I'm expecting this to be more of the same. So, to help celebrate 10 years of Hackney, let's get pouring. Oh, it is very refreshing on the nose. Huge waves of citrus, and that yuzu really powerful and present. And you are getting a little feel for some of that tartness. It's almost like sherbet on the nose. Wow! And it's like sherbet on the nose. Wow, it's like a massive dab of sherbet in the mouth too. It's super tart, it's super tangy. It is everything you want in a good sour. And it is real fresh, real zesty. That citrus, it really does pack a punch. And I tell you what, that seaweed sea salt, it does add an interesting element. It does carry a musty saltiness into the finish. And although the beer is light and vibrant, it does have a seawater-like mouthfeel, and you are left with a real mustiness in the mouth. It's almost like wet cardboard, and it really does contrast those early citrus notes. I gotta admit, there is something quite unique about this beer. It leaves this feeling in the mouth, a coating of that sort of wet, seaweed, seawatery thickness. And now we're down into the beer some. Some of that initial tartness has, of course, faded out a little. That yuzu, it's still very present and very refreshing up top, but I'm still trying to get my head around what's going on in the finish. So I've got to say, this was one unique brew. It kicked off like you'd expect, as a very traditional sour, led by that yuzu citrus. It was very tart, it was very refreshing, it was very light, it was almost like liquid sherbet. Almost exactly what I'd been anticipating. But it was in that finish where the beer really grabbed my attention. And for a sour, that is saying something. As in that tail, it does switch up like you would not believe. Those tart notes fade, as you would expect, but an almost seawater-like quality takes its place, and the beer becomes almost heavy in the mouth, even though you know it really isn't. It was something of an optical illusion just for the tongue, and it leaves the mouth feeling dry and quite musty. I likened it to wet cardboard, and I really can't think of a better analogy, other than maybe salty wet cardboard. It was something I haven't encountered in a beer yet, and because of that it really did conjure up images of seaweed while you're drinking it. And instead of those light and refreshing notes that you expect to find in a sour, it leaves you feeling like you've just swallowed something quite viscous and quite thick, even though you know you haven't. It's far from it. It's very light, it's very punchy, and it is very easy drinking in a sort of confusing way. And it does carry those notes and that strange feel all the way down. Yes, some of that initial tartness does dissipate just a little bit, but that citrus led by the yuzu remains ever present in those top notes. And similarly, that finish remains just as musty to the end. It might not be something I'm looking out for again in a hurry, but it was still interesting enough to be considered enjoyable. And something, if you do see it about, give it a go for a change.